Right.
Hello, hello, hello. It's Craig Fisher. This is a version of the Inside Talent podcast. We are live streaming on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube right now. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give some folks a couple of minutes to join, and then we'll get started. I'm joined today by Erika Oliver and Will Crandle from Horsefly. And Horsefly is a tool that I use very often with enterprise level global customers to understand their market dynamics, the economics of hiring, and other valuable insights. We'll get into that a little bit later. And today we're going to talk about what to expect in 2024, how to navigate your hiring situation, and really how to pivot your business when necessary and if necessary, and how you as talent acquisition, HR, and recruiting can have an impact on your organization with a little bit of valuable knowledge. So I think now is a great time for Erika, you, and Will to introduce yourselves. Erika, why don't you go first?
You bet. So my name is Erika Oliver, and I'm the VP of Customer Success and Product Strategy. Um, I oversee, obviously, the customer success team and partner closely with Will and our CTO on product strategy. Based in the greater Boston area, spent a lot of time in Colorado and grew up in the northern Midwest. So happy to be here.
Cool. I'm Will Crandle, founder and CEO of Horsefly Analytics. And I've spent the last 12, 15 years of my life solving HR problems with data.
All right. So let's get into this a little bit. We're seeing mixed messages from, especially from the U.S. Fed, right, with potential again point increases potentially. We've got. I read a very interesting article recently on Inc. that it is now not really feasible to purchase a home in the U.S. for the average person. The cost of leasing or renting is a much better deal by a lot because we're sitting at a 7% interest rate, and housing prices have just gotten to be, they're not going down. So we went up, right, during COVID. We've got a shortage of housing, and they're not going down. And it also leads me to wonder what that rental market means for the average individual trying to own rent houses, right? If you don't already own them, it's going to be tough to buy them unless you're doing it with cash because the interest rates are so insane. And so that's a trickle-down effect that kind of changes everything else, the way buyers act and the way businesses have to react. And so it's a weird situation for hiring because we're now kind of trying to do more with less. We've had lots of layoffs in the HR and TA space. And so we'll kind of get into that too. So in light of the current, let's call it a downturn, what are the most effective ways to leverage data analytics in the TA industry to make informed hiring decisions?
You can go first, Erika.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Will. And it's interesting, Craig. This one really hits home for me. I spent the last 10 years in Boston and in Cambridge and relocated to just outside of the city for some of the same reasons. I had planned on buying a home, and during that COVID era, whenever that was over, and it's just become to a place where it makes more sense to rent. So as you started things out, like you pretty much walk through my own particular personal story there. So I can definitely relate to a lot of the folks who are listening who are in that same predicament. To answer your question directly in terms of like, how do you leverage data to navigate a downturn? I think I'll start first and then like pass this back to you, Will. But from a TA perspective, I think our colleagues in talent acquisition in most industries are really feeling this the most, right? Like we've seen the ebbs and flows since easily 2008, 2009. And I think some of the best ways that talent acquisition organizations can get ahead of this is really prepare for when the tide does turn. And so really, leverage data to think about where are the existing talent hotspots, where are the emerging talent hotspots. Again, to your point, Craig, about a lot of relocation that's happened because of the cost of living, cost of buying a house, a lot of places. And then from a more practical perspective, work on building those talent pools for those hard to fill roles now. So that's my initial pass from a TA perspective. Will, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a really good one, that Erika. What I'm seeing with a lot of the TA teams is that a lot of scenario planning is going on because there's lots of rapid market changes at the minute, and businesses have to be ready for multiple futures. Whether it's a budget cut, um, strategy changes, or availability of talent, even. Understanding the sort of micro dynamics of your target talent markets is so important. And, we're seeing a lot of that going on at the moment. We had a company who had a big pivot to renewable energy in the Nordics, and they pivoted their sort of, they planned out ABC, these are the location choices we've got. And they moved a whole section of the business to Malaysia and, saved £30 million in, just by picking the different pools of talent that's available at the moment. So yeah, scenario planning is my big one.
Yeah. It's interesting to see when those pivots happen. I was part of a big one with Allegis Global Solutions several years ago, and it was pre-COVID, but we made the decision to offshore a lot of our sourcing strategy to the Philippines, and that group became a key partner for us and a big part of the organization. And I was over, I had a global team at the time, and, we found that Philippines team was not only extremely responsive and fast, but very interested and eager to, be part of what we were doing for, big customers. Yeah. And I've seen this a lot recently with several of my current customers. And, I do advisory and consulting for Fortune 500 organizations. And as we kind of downsize in certain areas, companies are still hiring, right? I mean, and this is the tricky part. So we do have a weird talent market because we've got a whole lot of white collar workers that are shouting on LinkedIn and other places that corporations just aren't responsive right now. But at the same time, recruiters and TA leaders, HR leaders, hiring managers still have to find a way to hire with this explosive amount of applicants, right? Most of whom aren't accurate for the job. And so I can imagine, and I know that for me, it's really helped to be able to dial in with market analytics to, kind of help people to opt into or out of the jobs that I'm helping to fill better.
Yeah, it's so true. And like, it comes to, like Erika said, data-driven decision making. Being able to unify, set realistic expectations with internal stakeholders is just so important. This market is just different, and being able to present it with cold hard facts is really important. And we've seen that, haven't we, a lot, Erika, with navigating the challenger market. It's multiple views. TA and hiring managers aren't sometimes aligned, and
yeah, no, that's exactly it. And to add to that, I think when I think about the larger organizations, they're also doing a lot of analysis and skill gap analysis as it relates to existing employees. So if people have had to make hard decisions around layoffs or any kind of transformational work, generally there's some skill gaps that have been unearthed that they weren't aware of. And so I think that's another way that people are using analytics to say, okay, what's in the market versus what do we have internally, and really trying to make informed decisions when they have to make tough decisions on folks that are working there. I think another thing too, and I feel like I'd be remiss not to address this. I think a lot of folks in TA, as recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, like some of the best, have been impacted by layoffs, and so it's a hard message sometimes to hear that some areas are flourishing and some aren't flourishing. And just to kind of tag on to this, I know we're going to probably talk about it later, but one of the ways, if you're in a company that's facing that potential restructuring, leveraging data to inform the decisions that you present really adds to your own internal value. And I know we'll speak to that a little bit later too.
Yeah. So I think you're hitting on a really interesting point. And Will, you kind of touched on this as well. In order to get things done, in order to get budget for things, in order to add value, you've got to make a case to upper management with data, right? And it's very important. Will, you and I were talking about marketing budgets earlier, and even if you've got leftover budget in your 2023 bank, you still have to make a good case for how you use it. And so for TA leaders, I know that when I've in the past been in that position and wanted to, for instance, do employee advocacy versus straight up advertising spend to attract talent, I had to prove that it would save us money and improve our results. But what are some other ways that recruiting and talent leaders can pivot and kind of impact innovative decision making in a market like this?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing that Erika touched on before was, TA are finding solutions to skill gaps from within their own internal organization. That's typically been workforce planning, resource planning, who have sort of done that. But just on that point, and it's probably related to your question, is that we're seeing TA work much more closely with workforce planning on the first horizon projects. So, short-term 12-month projects that TA can, have a real sort of impact on. And I think that's been the sort of biggest change. Those people who haven't been impacted by TA have took a broader view of their own roles. And a big part of that is internal mobility.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I think other things that we're seeing in TA, to Will's point, is a lot of overlap. We're seeing it in the TI space as well. We're seeing an increased overlap between talent intelligence, workforce planning, people analytics. There's always been a little bit of an intersection, but we're starting to see that to merge even greater. And I've heard through the Talent Intelligence Collective and some other folks are really close to the labor market analytics space that there's kind of an emerging discipline, we'll see if it sticks, around workforce intelligence. So really thinking about the external market data, looking at their internal market data from the talent pools, and thinking about location strategy to really drive all of those decisions. I'd say another element, kind of circling back more directly to your question, Craig, like what are some of the things that you can do to make a more compelling business case to senior leaders? Let's take marketing as example that you mentioned. Really getting crisp on where your target talent is, leveraging data to do that. That'll help you better target your marketing efforts, and also targeting your marketing channels. So for example, if we're thinking more white collar talent, LinkedIn, like obviously that's a no-brainer. If we're thinking demographically, Instagram, Snapchat may make more sense. Facebook might make more sense for others. And there's a whole story that we can follow up on that later in terms of what types of candidates typically use what channels. And then lastly, with that kind of amalgamation of really thinking about who we're targeting, where we should target it, then working with, your either internal or external recruitment marketing partners, and just get the most bang for your buck when you're doing those types of activities.
What are you saying, Craig?
What's that?
What are you saying, Craig?
Yeah, so this whole notion of overlap and talent intelligence is probably the most popular topic I'm hearing right now, right? So TA teams are asking me, Craig, we want to add AI to our tech stack. And so, right, and my first question is always, why?
Yeah.
Right? What do you think you're going to do with it?
Yeah.
And I think the number one use case for it, all right, so yeah, you can automate interview time slots and calendars and, take non-recruiting things off of recruiters' plates, but that's kind of table stakes now.
Yeah.
What I think the real value is in taking this talent data that we've been collecting for so long and not really using to any notable benefit to the organization, and now being able to crunch it down quickly and summarize what that data means, right, with generative AI. And that's the biggest benefit, right? So you ask ChatGPT, for instance, to rewrite a job description for you, and you can't just copy and paste what it says, because it writes in flowery language and it's full of bias, and it's not good. So the human eyeballs still have to be on those types of functions. But for taking large quantities of data or information and summarizing it, it's very good at that.
Mhm.
And in those situations, it doesn't matter if there's some flowery language in there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But so I guess when you're trying to do more with less, and that's some of what AI is able to help us do. But otherwise, we need that talent intelligence to really inform, that internal mobility function.
Yeah.
And right, how do you know when someone walks in the door what skills they should have 5 years later?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you only get one resume from them.
Right.
Right. So you could go out and check all of your employees' LinkedIn profiles, assuming they've ever updated them. But that's kind of a trick.
Yeah.
But so what are, I guess, some KPIs that we should kind of implore our, our talent functions to keep an eye on when we're trying to do less with more?
That's a
Right.
great question. I have so many thoughts about this. The first one is, if you have a talent intelligence team or workforce planning team, talk to them first before you establish your KPIs. I think before I answer this a little bit more directly, I think talent intelligence, internal professionals, and workforce planning professionals, they have such a wealth of information to really drive the creation of impactful KPIs. And so that's really like my most holistic answer, is talk to the people who know, who
Mm-hmm.
understand the swath of data, and help them, like leverage them to help you develop realistic KPIs. For those that may not have those functions internally, I think it's important to first do a heuristic analysis of all the activities that your TA teams are doing. Then look to the areas like, what can we automate realistically, to what you were talking about? So interview scheduling, so on and so forth, the table stakes kind of thing. I say start there. But I think I don't see a broad brush around KPIs there to get them right. But, would love your perspective on that too, Will.
Yeah, I haven't really got much to add on that. All I'd say is, the traditional age-old ones that everyone sort of historically looked at, like time to hire, cost of hire, stuff like that. I think with the advancement of the data sorting, we can actually sort of look at them in a bit more detail and make them more useful. Taking into account the time it takes to interview someone, the resource you're using to do that. But yeah, I think what Erika said is talk to people. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I suppose that assumes that your organization has a talent operations team in the first place,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good
I
point.
mean, a lot of times that gets sort of dumped on, people with other jobs, right? Or it's part of maybe a shared service in HRIS or IT or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's more to it. I mean, I think to both your points, there's more to it than just creating some fancy slides with the results of the data. It's what do you do with it after that's really important. And I think Horsefly certainly has benefited from the advancements, right? I mean, we've had AI for years, right? But generative AI and open source and have changed the game since really first quarter of last year. And so, speaking directly to my market intelligence vendor, right? How has Horsefly adapted some of the capabilities that lends us to, be more functional for TA teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think the generative AI stuff is more of a part that helps us bring more color to our data. In terms of improving how the user can consume the data and integrate with the data. So, for example, we're developing the opportunity for our users to speak to Horsefly at the moment and just say questions like, could you provide me with the top 3 locations to hire a Java developer with Hadoop, across the globe? And the part where it really helps us is sort of turning that question into something that's right for us, or within our perimeters.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's we've been working hard in the data for so long, and this, translating our taxonomy to 4 different versions of Chinese, for example, is something that we've done the hard yards on. And generative AI doesn't give you a solution to the problem, the taxonomy problem, for example. It gives you sort of high-level categorizations, but it's never going to give the solution to the problem. So, yeah, we're sort of excited about generative AI, but we're more into the whole graph database world, which has sort of come on leaps and bounds recently, thinking about the adjacency of jobs, for example, and like having different 4D models around the chronological order of jobs, the type of skills, job titles, companies, soft skills, hard skills, different categorization of skills, and building out AI that allows us to give people instant answers from that type of data.
So I love that answer for so many reasons, because you could easily look at a talent intelligence or market intelligence tool and kind of be real generic with what you're trying to discover. But I feel like that capability gives the average user a whole lot more power right? I mean, it's almost suggesting a good use case for the data, which is fantastic. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about relocation trends, right? So we touched on this earlier, and there's a noticeable shift towards suburban relocation, right? In all areas. And, downtowns are just becoming a strange place. And so, how should companies adapt their hiring strategies to accommodate that kind of change? And what impact does it have on, you know, talent acquisition and retention?
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. I think with the COVID era and the forced need to be remote, that just changed the entire ecosystem on where you work, how you work. And I think there are people that lived in the big cities, New York as an example, Boston as an example, San Francisco definitely, where I think people just got a taste of not living in the heart of the city, not dealing with some of the things that comes with certainly the prices. And I think after 2 years of that, people got used to it. They adjust their spending to it and thought, yeah, you know what? The smaller town in California is way more suited to my life than living in the Bay Area directly. Um, and then, moving to kind of where we are now, the shift to more of hybrid working models for many of the big companies, in some cases, return to office. I think that's impacting many companies' ability to hire high profile, high caliber talent that doesn't want to sacrifice the lifestyle that they've almost earned, making it through COVID and what that means for themselves and their families. So in my perspective, what I think companies should really think about is that cost benefit analysis. I mean, I think it'd be great thinking from a US perspective. I mean, it would be great to invest offices or satellite offices in some of these more like smaller, notably smaller um, towns and feed into that economy. I think that would be a great thing to think about holistically for companies. And then I think another thing that, I came from FANG prior to joining Horsefly. I think companies should really stop and think about quality of hire, impact of results, and the culture that they're building, and then to have a hard look at, okay, if we want people to be in the office, do we need to invest in offices in other places? So that's my initial thought there. Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's we've always had some fully 100% remote employees, so we were quite used to what needs to happen when COVID happens. That was good for us because really suited everyone. And I think if you've got a strong culture, remote works to a certain point. What I see the big problem is new people coming into the market, them serendipitous learning opportunities you get from working with people in the office that are more experienced. It's terrifying to me what the sort of next generation of people who are trying to find a foothold in the industry. I mean, I speak to a lot of graduate recruitment firms, and they're saying these young people are coming into the workforce and they don't know how to act when they're in a board meeting, or if they're in a meeting, they don't know how to communicate effectively. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing with some of the people that I mentor earlier in their careers. It's the same thing. In fact, I've noticed some of the like Gen Z, they're craving that like on the job learning. They missed out so much of the early career. Let's go out after work and making friends at work. So they really crave that. I'd say another aspect I think that people should consider as they're hiring, and where they hire. I love remote environments. This really works for me. I think personally it doesn't work for me because I will not stop working, and will be the first person to tell you that. And so I think when you're screening to hire, I think it's important to ensure that you're screening to ensure that that working remotely in a self-guided way aligns with their behavioral work style. If someone's like, Will and I tend a little bit more on the extroversion side or introversion side. Sorry, definitely introversion side. So for us, it's kind of a dream. But if somebody's more extroverted and they really, really feed off of human connection, they're probably not going to be as productive. So that's important to include that in the screening process.
So I think we have to include sort of forced extroverts as well, right?
True.
So that's me. While I've been perfectly happy.
No way.
I've been perfectly happy, right, working remotely for since 2007. I have had office jobs occasionally when I go in-house with big employers, right? And I've enjoyed that as well. But right now, several years ago when I started speaking at conferences and things like that, I decided that I was going to be a yes man, like Jim Carrey in the movie, right? I'm just going to say yes to everything because my default is to say no. I'm not leaving this house or certainly this neighborhood. But you made a really interesting point about having offices in suburban areas, because I'm actually seeing that on the rise, right? I'm seeing companies put smaller satellites in suburban areas, and I think that's a brilliant solution, right? We're going to have to do something with the office space that is, these giant, cavernous, very quiet and empty places now. Right. And so they're going to end up being mixed use because we've got a shortage of housing, and we've just talked about how it's cheaper to rent now. Right.
Yep.
And so there's a solution, there's a way forward, and it will create jobs and expansion. And I mean, it's the phoenix of our real estate crisis.
Yeah. It really is. And I think, like, I'll admit my bias because I grew up in small towns in the northern Midwest. But, we have clients. So I think in terms of like staffing and large RPOs, that, a large chunk of their business is light industrial staffing, as an example. Or if we think about the large non-staffing RPOs, you think about warehousing and delivery drivers and that sort of thing. So I think, it would be interesting to consider, if the cities were open to it, if you have like, a town in Michigan that has the infrastructure for more of that light industrial vibe, or towns in Wisconsin or towns in Indiana or Illinois or Kansas, maybe looking at that as a satellite office. It would be interesting to see what it would do for the American ecosystem in a good way.
Should we co-invest in some space, Craig?
That's probably a good idea, right? Yeah. We should get ahead of that. I think California and China have beat us to it.
Yeah.
We might be a little.
There's some pockets. There's some still pockets we can get into.
Yeah, no, I agree. I very much agree. I think, in fact, the American Northwest hates this trend right now because that's what's happening there. Right. The Great Wide Open is getting populated, which is still a fantastic place for me to visit. So I'm not complaining about any of that. But I think what we're saying is that flexibility is very important right now, right? If you're going to win the talent war, you're either going to say, we're not flexible, and anyone that doesn't want to be with us in this office, this one place, good luck, you're fired. Or we don't want you.
Yeah.
Or you can get the best talent, which if they're wise and smart, they have moved and right. They've gotten to a comfortable, nice place.
Yeah.
And so, how important do you all feel that flexibility is going to be for 2024?
I think it's going to be critical. If you don't mind me going first on this, Will. I mean, I think, there are other talent demographics that, I think even in our own company and other companies. So I think about working moms or working dads that are like the primary caregivers. Like some of the most talented people in the workforce fit into that demographic. But if they're forced to commute into an office an hour or even 45 minutes, that impacts things with their family. And so I think flexibility is really important for working moms and working dads that are the primary caregivers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said before, if you've got a strong culture, you've got people bought in, you can afford flexibility. But I wouldn't hire any really first stage of the career people without having some form of office set up for them. So we've been discussing that the back end of the year, and if we were going to go ahead with those plans, we set up a rota so the experienced team can come in and work with them on a rotated basis.
Yeah, you're so right, Will. And I think the other side of the coin too, when you offer flexibility, is the expectation around results. If you provide that full trust that comes in being fully remote or lots of flexibility, I think, you have to earn the right to have that. And so the expectation of delivering is far higher, at least from my perspective.
So it's interesting. That's a fantastic point. I saw an article earlier today. I see a lot of articles. But I saw an article earlier today that said a study shows that companies that have engineers, right, in the same space are more innovative. And other functions where innovation could and should take place, that they are. Now, this is just one study, right? And so we'll see something next month that says the complete opposite. That's the problem with this kind of data. But we can't really predict, and we haven't been very good recently at predicting how quickly we'll have a turnaround and what that turnaround looks like. Because before, we were concerned about inflation.
Yeah.
And now we're talking downturn. And in some cases, those terms are used together, right? I mean, one signals the other and vice versa. But, we'll know more by the end of first quarter of next year, right? The political picture will become a little clearer, and we'll either be in some kind of military conflict or we won't, right? And the pandemic, for all intents and purposes, was our most recent war, right? And that caused an expansion.
Yep.
And then that expansion, that war kind of ended. And as happens in every post-war scenario, there's a bit of a recession. And so we've become a little better at addressing that, right? With Fed activities and things like that. But now with this housing crisis, goodness, are we really good at it or not? I mean, it's an interesting question. So looking at the future, whether things are good or bad, how are TA leaders to adapt?
Do you want me to kick this one off? Will knows a lot to say on this one. So, I think one of the most amazing things, and again, I'm biased because I came from this space, that TA professionals and leaders bring to the table is that they have far more skills than you could ever imagine. And Craig, you probably know this too with your background. Talent intelligence, that discipline grew in large part out of sourcing activities and sourcing analyses and that sort of thing. So, my opinion and advice to TA leaders is number one, just get clear on what you want for yourself professionally, get clear on the initiatives and strategies and the values and the goals of the company or companies that you work for and support. Ensure that there's alignment, and then start thinking about ways how you want to grow. So the same crossover that we're seeing between TA and TI and workforce planning and people analytics, diversity and inclusion, those same trends, we can embrace that on an individual level. So I think that my advice to TA leaders, particularly in scenarios that are a little bit uncertain, know where you want your boat to go and try to steer it there. I have a couple of friends in this particular space from a previous company. They were clear on that, and they were able to navigate a change and transition in the midst of a lot of uncertainty that's only just leapfrogged their career. And I think, it's that Carol Dweck thing, right? Where it's like growth mindset, even in the face of instability. If you stay into a growth mindset, generally you're going to be able to find a way to thrive. If you're in a fixed mindset or that fight or flight mindset, you're going to tend to focus more on what's wrong in terms of where the opportunities are. I think another thing to think about too, and how TA leaders can thrive here, going back to the talent perspective and your comment about where are we going to be, particularly in the US in Q1 of next year. I have a lot of friends that are active duty military and a lot of friends that have just come home in the last year or two. And so I would say, as you think about target talent markets and target talent pools, we really, really need to think about our veterans. Absolutely. We need to think about our active duty and reserves as far as future state pipeline. Some of the folks over there and what they can do from IT security, data analysis, data science. I just think that they can bring so much to the table. So I think that's another thing that as we're thinking about, are we going to be in a military conflict or are we going to be in a place of stability? We need to think about how we're going to support our active duty and veterans, especially in the United States. So that's my thought on that.
I'm a big fan of that message.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, no, absolutely. I think Erika's the best answer you could give. I've just managed to return at TV just without disrupting this conversation. But
You're brilliant. You're brilliant. And another point to that, on the military point, without giving too many details, I had the privilege of speaking to a couple of classes at West Point Thanksgiving week in one of the STEM fields. I'll leave it there. And, the brilliance that's there, the humility that's there, they don't even realize it. For them, serving our country is a foregone conclusion. And they're already thinking like, well, when my time comes to retire, whether it's like after this period or, after they retire, which most military people retire and then they take on 2-3 more jobs. They're curious about how they're perceived, like the way that I think you feel, Craig, I feel, Will feels, is like there's so much respect and gratefulness for the stuff they do and understanding things that may not directly align with a resume are just the skills that we need. So I think as we think about, okay, where are we going to land politically and otherwise after Q1, we got to make sure that we don't forget these guys too now.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I've got one of my good friends who coached my youngest son's football team for years, and he's part of a group that we have that gets together for happy hour on almost every Friday for the last 5 years. He's a pilot for American Airlines, and he's a former Air Force officer. And he he does multiple things, right? So he still flies, but pilots have a lot of downtime,
Yep.
right? And so in his downtime, he works for the pilots union, which, right, is a skill that he gained from leading teams in the U.S. military, right? And what we forget sometimes, and my event, TalentNet Live, has donated proceeds to veterans and hiring for veterans for many, many years. But what we don't think about a lot of times is the logistics involved, right? The data and logistics involved in running an organization like the U.S. military. So if you think about it in a regular large corporation, how many different project teams there are, right? And how many different areas within the company there are, with multiple project teams. The U.S. military is one of the largest corporations in the world,
Absolutely.
right? And these people have fantastic skills. So yeah, I'm a big fan of helping those under represented workers in their. I do.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead, Craig. Obviously, we both feel passionate about this, which I love. Like the forced extrovert and the borderline introverts, we're kind of like got jazzed about this. This ties back to what you're asking too. Like, what can TA leaders do right now? A lot of folks have a desire and passion to recruit. Recent veterans or active duty if they're reserves or so on and so forth. I think an area that could definitely use improvement across the board is like, let's develop recruiters that have the understanding of how to translate skills of someone who just came out of the Air Force, was overseeing a team of 150, had like a huge remit, huge P&L responsibility, which you don't often think of.
Right.
How do you translate that in a way that a hiring manager sees them at a similar level rather than an entry level? That's a phenomenon that I think with the best of intentions happens on a regular basis. So that's another thing I think TA leaders could consider, is just developing more skills and understanding in all diverse populations. And I think particularly within veterans. So
very interesting. And I think just while you guys have been talking there, I spoke earlier about our data being in this graph database technology. Looking, we could very easily look at the analysis of how veterans have moved through the career and how they've been most successful. So looking at the adjacent jobs and skills and companies that they work for in specific locations, you could actually map out, what where these people can help, across the board. So just really interesting.
I think that old school recruiters know about this, right? They
Yeah.
have that skill. They've been through multiple military conflicts and downturns in the economy and things like that. But the younger generation of recruiters, we're not passing that skill along. I don't think. There's so many things to teach a recruiter in the first place. We're not. I don't think we're focusing on that as much as we should. But talent intelligence can help us, right, to solve some of that. And so if we give them the data and give them the tools and say, look, here's why this type of person would be good in this type of role, we've now got tools that I didn't have when I started recruiting in the 90s to understand all this, right? And another interesting thing is we're not sure. So, TA people get laid off and they wonder why. And what we're not sure about the value we're adding sometimes. And, not all market segments are down right
right.
now, right? I mean, what we're talking about is largely white collar jobs, but a lot of the hourly wage jobs are booming and thriving, and still have a talent deficit.
Yeah.
And so, I'm very interested. So I've seen Horsefly's sort of longitudinal data that is interesting. And in fact, I put it on a slide if you all want to see it. And I'd love for you all to talk about this. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find that here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you're pulling that up, you're exactly right, Craig. Like there are industries like oil and gas that's really, really, they're not experiencing a downturn at all. Utilities is the same thing. There are definitely pockets that
Right.
there's no struggle at all.
Yeah. So this is Horsefly's longitudinal data set, right? Helps with workforce planning and talent strategy. And so the average CEO or CIO or CPO now has some remarkable tools in its tool belt. So talk me through this a little bit. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so this is a sample of supply and demand over time, supply and demand of a specific skill set over time. It was very important that we could match the granular capability of the platform, so people could specifically ask really detailed questions and really granular locations to see how supply and demand has changed over time. And it's a lot of the data in talent intelligence, and it's all about what's happened historically. But this is the really predictive, and it gives you a 3-year view into the future, well, 12 to 3-year month view into the future to see how we expect the dynamics of the market to change. I think, Erika, you've got first-hand experience of working with clients.
Oh yeah, I was smiling to myself because whenever you speak to someone, particularly in the TA space or workforce planning, everyone recognizes that spike of the 2020 kind of unexpected expansion. And so, that's another, again, like going back to kind of the root of like in TA, people analytics, HR, how do you use data to make strategic, informed decisions? When you look at things like this, it's like we've been here before. We've been at the downturn. Like at the beginning of COVID, we all remember the US, 90% of the companies were laying people off or freezing budgets. And then there was that huge rebound. And so, I think we don't know what the future is going to hold necessarily. It's hard to predict where we're going to really land. We hear some mixed messaging, particularly in the States. But if we've learned anything over the last 10, 20 years, it's just to be prepared. Be prepared. Look at, remember what we went through in 2020, the 20-hour days of trying to find talent, and identify your key skill set and develop those talent pools now to be ready when things turn around.
So one thing we should stress, because we have talked a lot about sort of the U.S. economic situation, but one of the things that I really find valuable about Horsefly's data is that it is global, right? And so if anyone watching today wants to see more about this longitudinal data set and what it could do for you, and you want to schedule a demo with Horsefly, just message any of us, right? And I think this is still a thing. I think if you do set up that demo, you might get a free copy of my book, Hiring Humans. So
That's brilliant.
yeah. If you're into that, which it's a pretty good book, let's check this out. And I want to thank both of you for joining me today. We're going to do this again in January, And we're going to kind of take this conversation to another level, because we're going to have some more data by then, which will be very interesting to see how the year is starting off. And we'll do regular check-ins throughout the year on this. And so join us again. You'll receive some communication from us with thank yous and free things and whatnot. And, be part of our community. We appreciate everyone that spent some time with us today. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Any parting thoughts, Erika and Will?
First, thank you, Craig. This is great. I'm excited to do it again and to be connected with your community. And I'd say to the folks listening or listen to this later that are in TA, hang in there. Don't give up. Don't give up. I have been in your shoes. I've been part of a mass layoff. And sometimes, only when it's dark enough do you actually see the star shine. So that's what I'll leave you with. Hang in there.
Oh, we've got to end on that, Craig, but really appreciate it. I really appreciate you inviting us on. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and hopefully we can add some value to your audience.
All right, everyone, thank you, and we will see you again soon. Let me hear from you. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.